President Trump seems to be alarming Democrats with his latest comments on the 2026 midterm elections.
For instance, there's this exchange during an interview with NBC News where Trump said that if states can't conduct elections properly and timely, something else will have to happen.
Will you trust the results of the midterms if Republicans lose control of Congress?
I will, if the elections are honest.
During a podcast interview with former FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, Trump said that Republicans, quote, ought to nationalize the voting, end quote. During the NBC interview, however, Trump said this.
And I didn't say national, I said there are some areas in our country that are extremely corrupt. They have very corrupt elections. As an example, voter ID. Why don't the Democrats want voter ID?
This prompted The View's Whoopi Goldberg to weigh in on the matter, saying in part, quote, has nobody showed you the things that have come out of your mouth, sir? You did say that, but it's just a hint that we're going to hear more election fraud claims if the GOP loses. Senator Ruben Gallego, a Democrat, took it further, saying that if Trump were to, quote, sabotage the midterms, Americans should respond with a general strike that would grind the country to a halt. Gallego said Thursday, quote, we need to make sure that we have an ultimate response to that, which I believe has to be a true national strike, in the sense that if they do this, if they try to overthrow our democracy, if you're allied with democracy, do not go to work. If you're a pilot, do not show up. If you drive a train, do not show up. If you're a teacher, do not show up. Well, lots to discuss here, Amber. Take it away.
Okay, so I think what was happening here is that they were probably talking about the SAVE Act, which is the bill that is sort of lingering in Congress that would create national voter ID. And Republicans are very upset with how slowly the bill has been moving through committee. Senator Mitch McConnell was in the hospital, might still be in the hospital for the flu, and he sits on the chair of the committee that needs to do the markup to advance the bill. So some Republicans sent him a letter asking him to hurry up and get the bill through. John Thune is also not super thrilled about the SAVE Act because he doesn't want any federal control over elections. And so there's this big fight happening in Congress between the more, I suppose, right-wing Republicans and the more establishment folks. The complaint about the SAVE Act is that Republicans fear that if they pass this bill, that gives permission to Democrats to further federalize certain controls over elections. But my response to that would be that there was a federal election bill that was brought up during the Biden administration. It was actually one of the first major legislative pushes that they made. It ultimately failed due to some opposition from more moderate Democrats who were concerned about the same thing. But they've already tried to do it. So I think the complaints from Republicans that, well, if we do it, the Democrats will do it, and then they'll have control over elections the next time they take power. Everybody's trying to have some federal control over elections. But there's always been this question of, do the states get to control every aspect of the electoral process, or are there some things that should be codified on a national level so we have some kind of set standard? And there's arguments for both, right? Because when you have the federal government trying to run every election in all of the states and precincts and localities, that is an inordinately difficult task for a single bureaucracy to manage. And so that's better done on the local and state level. But are there some things like voter ID, perhaps a national, holiday for election day that maybe makes sense to do in Congress?
Sure. So obviously I have a very different view on that, and I'm kind of team Whoopi Goldberg on this, but I want to get into the issue about federalizing elections generally in a second, because I do think there are arguments for and against that. But one of the difficulties here with Trump, and I want to get the quote exactly right, is his bombastic or at least inexact way of putting things, because the actual quote was, the Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. So, first of all, he did use the word nationalize. But secondly, to say a political party should take over the voting is, obviously that sets alarm bells off on the other side, as it would if Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom stood up and said Democrats should take over the voting. Now, that's, you and I have talked about January the 6th numerous times. I don't think we need to relitigate our arguments on that. But there are, I mean, the issue that you raise that I've most in common with of the points you made was this point about should there be some, is it permissible for there to be some federal controls or baselines, even if the actual administration of voting is through the states? So, I mean, way back, I had to look this up because I'd frankly forgotten about it. In the early 90s, there was a law passed that enables a thing that's now just commonplace everywhere of the DMV giving you the option to register to vote when when you do that. Nobody, I don't really, well, certainly it wasn't that controversial at the time. I don't think anyone would say that's the federal government seizing control of elections. It's enabling easier registration, which or more convenient registration. That seems to me, if that sort of thing is what we're talking about, that's a very different debate to saying a political party, whichever one it is, should take over the voting.
Yeah, I think it is, as you put it, the inexact way that Trump often speaks about these issues, because when I hear on social media from conservatives and Republicans who are advocating for passage of the SAVE Act, one of the other things that they routinely bring up is the idea that we have certain states that are able to get their results out very quickly after polls close. Florida is a great example of this. They changed their system pretty aggressively since the 2000 recount and have been one of the most streamlined, efficient states to count votes and get those tallies out very quickly without delay. And they don't allow a lot of, postmarked ballots or things happening after Election Day. And so when you contrast that with some states that have vote tallies taking place, a week after Election Day and we're sitting around on our hands waiting for results, does that mean we should have some kind of federal baseline where we don't allow states to, allow people to cure ballots after Election Day or postmark ballots for 3 days after Election Day so that we have all of the results coming out at the same time and people can feel confident in those results without sort of the fishiness or weirdness of these delays?
I mean, I think that though that the perception of fishiness is one that, to my mind, Trump in particular, more so even than the broader Republican Party, has fostered in an unjustified way to undermine faith in elections. But to go to the broader point that you make about the speed of results, that I think is an interesting debate in and of itself, because I am not particularly opposed really to the idea of paper ballots only. If you have paper ballots, though, you need human beings to physically count the ballots. And so the declaration of results takes a much longer time. In Ireland and Britain, it's paper ballots overwhelmingly. And so the results take days, but people don't consider the delay of that to be something fishy, to use your word, or to be something that undermines public confidence in elections. I think what has undermined public confidence in elections has been a concerted effort for partisan reasons to do that.
I will say that one of the big issues that people had in 2020 that was really separate from Trump's public comments about what happened was, and I've always said this too, is that there hasn't been evidence that votes were changed on some mass scale or that there were enough errors to swing the election to Joe Biden. Is it possible to happen? I guess, but we haven't seen evidence of that. But what I found actually more concerning was how much the rules were changed so close to Election Day because of the pandemic. And so that's a lot of where that uncertainty came from, because in Pennsylvania, for example, you had local officials changing the rules to allow, certain votes cast without signatures on mail-in ballots, or certain localities were allowing people to cure mail-in ballots and others weren't. So the standardized process that we would typically expect got really upended. And because the rules were changed so close to Election Day, I think a lot of precincts did not have the proper guidance that they needed to run the election in a way that was abiding by those new standards. And there were a lot of open questions about, and in court cases at the time, including in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, about what exactly the rule changes meant for those election officials. And so that element of it, of the rule changing as opposed to what happened to ballots once they were turned in, was where I think people actually had legitimate concerns.
I think that there were, I mean, that's the part where I think that there is a debate to be had about how about those rules in relation to the pandemic and the need to not disenfranchise people, but also to abide by rules. Now, that debate is very, very different from Trump's constant reiteration of the false idea that the election was rigged. And on the point of the court cases, sometimes one hears from very MAGA people, not from you, I notice, because you're more accurate about these things, but there's this idea that, oh, well, those court cases weren't adjudicated on the facts, they were adjudicated only on the basis of whether there was standing. That is true in some cases. It's certainly not true in all cases, where in a number of those court cases, the specifics were looked into, and as you, I think, acknowledged, there wasn't evidence of rigging. So,
well, we will see what happens with the SAVE Act. I think that's going to be an interesting fight in Congress. Yeah. Up next, the NFL selection of Bad Bunny for Sunday's halftime show is facing backlash from some on the right. We'll talk about it next. Stick with us.